I attended my first anime convention in 2011. I continued attending conventions while filming my experience until the end of 2017, at which time I chose to go on an indefinite hiatus to follow my dream of traveling the world. I came back to the anime convention scene exactly 5 years later in 2022 and have attended a few cons since returning. I recently did a Q&A here on the channel, and by far the question I got asked the most was, how have conventions changed since I left in 2017? I did answer this question in the Q&A, but it caused me to ask an even broader question. How have anime conventions changed since I first started attending back in 2011? Glopping. Google defines glopping as a lunging, enthusiastic, over-the-top, and potentially dangerous hug that often begins with a running start, like a tackle. This is something anime characters do all the time, but in real life, it's absolutely horrifying. Now, normally, this was just between friends, but imagine minding your own business when suddenly some random person just comes out of nowhere and tackles you to the ground because they liked your cosplay. Things like this did actually happen at one point. Luckily, it's mostly died off at cons nowadays and was already starting to die off when I first went in 2011. I think part of the reason for this, other than it being a literal hazard to the health of the person being glopped, is the next change I noticed, and this is a big one. Cosplay is not consent. As far as I remember, the cosplay is not consent movement either didn't exist in 2011 when I first started attending, or at the very least it was still finding its footing. Whether it's the fact that sometimes cosplay can be a bit revealing, that someone is cosplaying a character that people find easily approachable, or any number of other ridiculous reasons. Some people in the convention scene have used these as excuses to just straight up touch cosplayers completely unprompted. I can never forget, at one of the first conventions I ever went to, my girlfriend at the time was cosplaying Yoko from Gurren Lagann, and this dude just came up and picked her up, and he did it like 2 or 3 more times throughout the weekend. She was super uncomfortable with it, all of us were uncomfortable, but we were so shocked. It was one of our first conventions. We didn't really know what to do. None of us really knew what was happening or how to react. And unfortunately, I've seen creepy people do things like this to others after that point. I do have a story time about this if you want to hear more. But this is just the tip of the iceberg to how creepy people used to just openly treat cosplayers back in the day. I do think this is still a problem, but over the years, cosplay is not consent has become a super common phrase in the cosplay and convention community. And most every convention nowadays has signs up reminding would-be creeps that they will not get away with touching people unprompted. I do personally regret not stopping people from doing this type of thing when I saw it in the past. It was just such a shock, but it's something I would never let go uncalled out today. More family-friendly conventions, and more kids in general. When I first started attending, we would see kids at cons every now and then, but it was always a bit of a rarity. Over the years, I've seen more families going together and more kids running around conventions in general. I think this gradual increase has a few sources. First of all, there are just more kids than ever into anime and manga. When I first started going, it was only popular among nerdy kids and had not yet reached mainstream notoriety. Back then, anime conventions were the only reliable place that I could meet like-minded anime fans and buy anime merch. Today, all I have to do is walk into a mall and I'm slapped in the face with anime merch and people actually buying it. On top of that, some cons have actually taken advantage of becoming a more family-friendly con, setting stricter guidelines on how revealing a cosplay can be at their convention. And on top of that, cons have gotten a lot better about separating out 18+ content into their own panels that are strictly ID checked before allowing entry. Now we live in a world where you have the option to attend the old style of anime convention that can be a little bit more adult, or a more family-friendly version, with both still being great experiences. Everyone wants to be famous. When I first started going, people all seemed to cosplay and make videos just because they purely loved it. They were fans and they wanted to express that. I'm not saying people don't love it anymore and aren't really real fans anymore, but I do think it's changed a bit. In 2011, I remember Jessica Nigri and Yaya Han being the only famous cosplayers I had ever heard of. If you looked online, there were a few people posting things here and there, maybe trying to get a following, but nothing like it is today. Nowadays, it seems like everyone at least has an Instagram they're trying to get to blow up, if not more. On top of that, back in 2011, if I asked someone if they wanted to be in a cosplay video, I would get a lot of weird looks, and a lot of people would straight up say no. Today, everyone knows what a cosplay video is, and pretty much all of them are hyped to do it, whether just for fun or maybe for a chance to get more eyes on their work. Before, I would be lucky to run into even one other serious videographer at a con, but now they swarm everywhere, along with photographers. I guess this is honestly another change in and of itself, more videographers than ever. I do hope I don't sound too negative on this point, because I really don't think any of this is bad at all. It's just really interesting for me to see how the mindset around cosplay and cosplay videography has changed over the past 12 years. More Japanese guests. In 2011, unless I was going to some really huge con like ASIN, I would generally only see English language guests at conventions, and most of the time these would be English voice actors. At the time, I still watched a lot of dubs, so this was still super exciting for me. But over the years, I gradually moved away from primarily watching dubbed anime and slowly felt less and less interested in guests at conventions. But very, very slowly, I noticed cons actually being able to pull Japanese industry guests, whether voice actors, animators, illustrators, composers, and even Japanese bands and musical artists. The first time I really noticed this change happening was at Techo. I think it was 2015, maybe 2016, I'm not sure, when they brought Back On, famous for the Air Gear opening among many others. Since coming off my hiatus, at every con I've been to, there's been at least 1 or 2 Japanese guests. I think this really helps cons feel more legitimate and leads perfectly into the last big change I've noticed. Conventions feel more like professional events and less like small fan events. In 2011, you could really feel that cons were by fans for fans. They didn't run perfectly. Maybe the guest list wasn't that great, or the production for main events was lacking. But you forgave these things because you knew it was just a fan-run event meant to bring like-minded people together. When I go to conventions today, most all of these issues are now resolved. Organization is consistently at a high level. Guest lists are much more expansive, and most main events truly feel well put together. Are there still those smaller, grassroots feeling conventions out there? Yeah, of course. But most cons nowadays reach a level of production that I really think leads to a feeling of authenticity as an event that I feel was lacking at cons back in the day. Things just feel good now. I don't find myself needing to make excuses for or forgiving cons for dropping the ball in certain areas because they're small fan-run events. Well, after racking my brain, that's every big change I could think of. Whether these changes are for better or worse is up to each of us to decide for ourselves. But personally, I think conventions have been heading in a positive direction. If there's any big changes you think I missed, please, by all means, leave them in the comments and let's get a discussion going down there. Thank you guys so much for watching, as always, and stay nerdy.